Listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 240.
Today's podcast is brought to you by OneTDC.com. Dog agility can be hard on your dog's body. Help keep their joints and muscles healthy with 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a clinically studied blend of unique fatty acid oils that can support your dog's joint health. 1TDC provides a healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at bda1tdc.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hititboard can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today, we're going to be talking about markers in your agility training. And if you're not familiar with that term, let me give you an extremely common marker to start off the conversation, and that is the click. So I think most of our listeners are hopefully familiar with clicker training. We've talked about it on past podcasts, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. But basically, the click tells the dog what you were doing at that exact moment was right, and I'm going to give you a treat. At least that's the most common use of the clicker. And we often also encourage people to create something that doesn't require their hands. Like when you're using a clicker, you have to have that clicker in your hand. And sometimes if you're juggling, a leash and treats and a toy, and the clicker is just one thing too many. And so we will often use a replacement. Like for us, we use the word yes. And yes means the exact same thing as a click. It means what you were doing at that moment was right, and you are going to get a reward. And so today we want to go a step beyond the click and the yes and talk about other marker signals that you might need or want or think about using in your agility training, and about marker signals that you may have that you don't realize you have and the problems that might cause.
Yeah, I think it's kind of taking things to the next level to go past just the click and the yes and talk more about location-specific marker signals. So the click might mean that, yes, you're getting a reinforcement and you're marking that exact moment for the behavior, but what reinforcement are you getting? Is it going to be food? Is it going to be toy? Is it going to be a food from my hand? Is it going to be a food on the ground? Possibly the same thing for the yes command. And I think kind of the evolution of dog training and agility, we are seeing handlers become better trainers, right? It's not just about the handling and the motion and the running and the crosses, but really becoming better dog trainers and kind of expanding, what markers we have, how many markers we have, establishing some very location-specific markers. And what this is going to do is it's going to clarify things for the dogs. And as we know, a very consistent system, dogs that are very understanding of what it is that we want are going to be the dogs that are happy, motivated, and driven on course.
So let's hear from you, Jennifer, about these location-specific markers. So this is something that you have recently added to your handling. And tell us a little bit about the influence there and what your markers are these days when you're training your dogs.
Yeah, so I'm kind of still relatively new to this idea of having multiple markers and having location-specific markers. I've in the past, very similar to what we talked about, was just using kind of a yes command and a clicker, right? So just kind of having the two. But as of recently, so just almost a year, come February, it'll be about a year, I've tried to kind of get more clear with my dogs and have a variety of location-specific markers. And what I mean by that is markers that indicate not only was that behavior correct and that a reinforcement is about to come, but being specific about what the reinforcement is and where the reinforcement is coming from. So right now I have a variety of food markers. One that I have is going to be the word take. Take basically means you can come and take food from my hand. All right. Versus find, which is my marker for food on the ground. So both of those are going to indicate a food reinforcement, but I'm changing location. So theoretically, if I say the word find, my dog should almost kind of turn their head and look on the ground in anticipation of delivery onto the ground. Where if I say take, I would then expect my dog to come into me and anticipate food from my hand. Other food markers that I do have the beep or the tone of a treat and train to be a marker. So we're not just talking verbal markers, but also like the clicker is more of a sound. The manners minder, when I put the volume on and it makes that beeping noise, that is also a marker releasing the dog to food from the treat and train. And then most of the time when I'm using the clicker, I will use food. So my clicker is what I would kind of say is my room service marker. So when I give that click, it is marking the behavior, but it does not give the dog permission to break position. So it is going to be, okay, you're doing what I want. I am now going to return to you for a reinforcement. So it's a little bit different than the take or find, which allow my dog to come to me or come to the ground for the reinforcement. The click is going to be me returning back to them. And then I currently just have one toy cue, and that is get it, or toy marker, which is get it. I don't do a lot of throwing of toys in my agility training. I'm either releasing my dog to a dead toy or I'm doing a lot of tugging. So get it is either of those. If the toy's already been planted and I say get it, they can run to where the toy's on the ground. If the toy's in my hand when I say get it, they can come to me and tug. I don't do a lot of throwing. So when I say get it, the dog should not be tracking out ahead, kind of looking ahead like you might, if they would throw a Frisbee, because I don't do a lot of throwing of the toy. So that's kind of where I'm currently at, which again is only about a year into things for me on those specific markers.
And I can see the utility. It made me think of one specific problem that we've had in training in the past, couple of years. And that was we were doing running contacts with our Border Collie Miria, and we were doing it with Sylvia Turkman. It was several years ago before the mat training. And so the ball was rolled out in front as basically a lure, and the dog goes after the ball. And if they have a good hit, then you click. And then when they come back with the ball, then you play a reward or give them the treat or whatever the big reward is, right? The ball is always there. And what would happen is she would run after the toy like, super fast. She would hit the spot. I would click. And the moment she heard the click, she would abort going after the toy and come to me, because the majority of the clicker training had been, more basically at my body. And she no longer wanted that toy that she was just chasing all out. She immediately was coming back to me, and our click does basically end the behavior. So that's, yet another thing that you have to decide with your markers is what do they really mean? And with Esteban and I, when the click ends the behavior. And so as soon as she heard that click, she was pulling off of her running behavior and coming back to me. So I could see where then having a marker that means that was right, but go forward, or you're going to have an alternate reward out front would be very useful.
Wow, that is such a great example. And now I'm kind of going back in my mind and reliving her training and everything that I had done with her as far as tugging. I think that can make a lot of sense. Like if I'm always using a clicker when, for example, I give treats and I'm giving treats from the hand, then suddenly if I'm out there, and let's say when I use a toy, I'm never using a clicker because I'm like, oh, I don't have room. I'm holding, this toy. I need two hands to tug with it. And I'm always using my voice, the yes. So when I say yes, I wouldn't be surprised if the dog's always about to jump on you looking for the tug toy, or when you click, they're always looking for the food. They're not going to run out. That is very, very interesting. Yeah, very cool. And I think the other thing that we should take a moment here and talk about, because you just touched on this, is that the click can have two different meanings for different handlers, right? So we run into this problem. I don't know if you want to call it a problem. We run into this issue all the time with our VIP members, right? They'll send you a video. You're working on, say, a stop position on a contact, 2 on, 2 off. And for me, as soon as the dog reaches the position, whether, I'll have them stay there for a second or 2 seconds or 10 seconds or immediately release, when I hit that clicker, Or when I say yes, since those words are equivalent to me, the dog is free to do whatever they want. Literally, right? The dog can run out of the building. They could flop over on the back. They can sniff the ground. I don't care what they do. I'm going to offer them their food. Whether or not they take it, that's their business. But this is how the system works. I market. They're free to do whatever they want. But a lot of other people, and this includes many great trainers,
including Jennifer.
Sylvia Turkman being another one, who's been very influential, I think, with all of us. There are situations where they click and the dog is expected to maintain that position, right? So they get presumably the same information. At this moment, you're doing the right thing, but the reward is coming. Now, here's where the problem happens, right? Good trainers like Jennifer and Sylvia are going to run into this much less than other people because they're better about this, maintaining this criteria. But dogs are going to move before you get there very often, right? So let's say I'm one of those people that the click does not end the behavior. If my dog is downing and I click, I expect them to remain downing. And then I'm going, even if I'm 20 feet away, I'm going to go all the way back to my dog and give them food. Whether I walk, jog, or run, I'm going to get there, but the dog cannot come toward me, right? But what's going to happen is right when the food's about to get there, it's just an inch or two away, they're going to raise up just a little bit. And now you created a latency. You've introduced a new behavior in between the behavior that you wanted and the time they got the reward. And so we know from studies and frankly, just from experience, that the large subset of dogs are going to build that into their behavior, right? They're going to start getting up a little bit and more and more and more. And that's where the difference between Jennifer and Sylvia versus a novice comes into play, right? Jennifer and Sylvia are going to notice it and they're going to withhold the reward, right? And so I think there's debate here for a lot of trainers. Well, what does this mean? Are we not honoring the agreement that a click or a mark leads to food, right? Which I think is why there are people who, a lot of people who do it the way that I do it, which is fine. This is not a debate that I feel too strongly about. I feel strongly enough about it that I picked one way and I do that and I advocate for that. But I don't think the other way doesn't work because we have seen it work, right? You just need to be very clear about your criteria. And when that problem pops up, you need to address it. And in general, we do want to say that, every time you click, you're going to give the dog a treat, but every once in a while, you're going to miss what I call misclick. And when you're looking at ranges of behaviors that number in the hundreds or thousands, a couple of mistakes, just not that big a deal.
Right.
Just like someone's mean to you one time and it's the only interaction you've ever had with that person, it's a big deal. You think that person's mean. But if they've been nice to you 999 times and this is the first time, you're going to say, hey, are you having a bad day? Like This is very unlike you. Okay. So it's all about the history there. But this is what we're talking about. And so the click has different meaning for our dogs. And what Jennifer is talking about here, I think is very, very useful for that because now she sent me a very cool video of some training she was doing. So now when the dog hears the click, the dog didn't even blink. The dog made no attempt to get up. The dog did not jolt. The dog knows, hey, I did the right thing and I'm going to stay right here because Jennifer is going to hand deliver this treat right to my mouth, right? And then when the dog heard the manners minder, it was a manners minder that you were using, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Immediately turned away from Jennifer because they knew where the manners minder was and went straight to it. And so I thought that was really cool because it solves this problem that we've been dealing with and that we see in videos over and over again when we watch people train that leads to very real problems in the agility ring for these start line behaviors and contact behaviors.
And I think that the overarching theme here is whatever markers you use and however many you have, you need to be very clear both with yourself and with your dog and with how you actually use them on what exactly they mean. And so, you need to know for yourself what those rules are, and you need to have enough experience with the dog that they understand what those rules are.
And I think the context is kind of a great place to talk about, the idea of having multiple reinforcements and the benefit that you can have excuse me, multiple markers, not multiple reinforcements. And the benefit because on my contacts, if I'm going to come down a contact, drive into that 2-on-2 and I just want to immediately then release forward for a reinforcement, then I would just say take. Right? So she nails her 2-on-2, I say take, she releases off, flies out to me to my hand, gets her cookie. If I run past and she does her 2-on-2 and I click, she holds there and I go back to her. So I'm still doing a decent amount of, kind of releasing forward versus releasing back to her. I'm just using that verbal and using that marker to differentiate to her what's about to happen. So for our VIPers who are kind of getting caught up on the obstacle modules that we're posting, after you've listened to this, you will probably find the teeter module, my introduction to teeter and introduction to table videos, to be maybe slightly different if you were to rewatch them, now knowing what my markers are and recognizing the use of them. So on that table video, on that teeter video, you'll see that dog hops up onto the table, hits that down. If I click, completely holds position, I come back to her. She hops up on the table, hits that down, and I say, fine, she's going to hop off because now she's looking for a cookie on the ground. So it still gives you a lot of flexibility in the type of release that you're going to do from these static positions when you have these different markers. So I think it really improves the versatility of your training in addition to kind of giving the dog more clarity on what the reinforcement is, where that reinforcement is going to be given.
That is so interesting. Let me run another one by you. And I know we haven't talked about this before, but when I was training Gitchy, she'd already been taught to weave. And one of the things that Susan told me was, you tell her to weave, that's her cue, she gets in the weaves, but she needs kind of like a continuing on type of signal, right? You got to say, go, go, go. And then she goes and she finishes, even very tough exits. And when I first got her, I was like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm just going to teach her how to weave and she's going to weave no matter what. And we don't need this extraneous stuff. I'm all about communication and really minimizing the things that are coming out of my mouth so that when I do speak, it has meaning and the dog should be taking action. And so, at some point I just gave up because it was happening. I wouldn't say anything. She would suspect that she was wrong. Right. And it would lead to mistakes or it would lead to slower performance. She clearly was not confident. And all I had to do was say, go, go, go. And she was running through there as fast as she possibly could. And I said, you know what? This is not broken. I don't need to fix it. And so I wonder if in that case, it's related to what we're talking about here. Because how many times have I thought, me personally, I've thought, okay, I would love to click an entry, a tough entry. Right? Because they get the entry correct, but then they mess up like 5 or 6 pulls later. And you can't click it because for me, again, so not maybe for you or for someone else, but for me, click ends the behavior, right? So as soon as I click when they find the entry, in theory, they should be able to pop right out and come get their reward, right? Which I kind of don't want them to do. I want them to get their reward. I want them to know they're right. But my system, because I don't have your multiple marker system, right? My markers are more limited. I don't have a way to let them know you've done the entry correctly, but now you need to finish the polls and then you're going to get your reward, which I kind of view as similar to this duration behavior we're talking about. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with your initial comments that, I don't have to put my dog in the weave poles and keep cueing the performance. So I don't say weave and then have to say go, 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 go to keep them in. No different than the dog walk is a 36-foot long obstacle. I don't say walk and the whole way across the dog walk say walk it, walk it, walk it. When I say walk it, that is your cue to go up, go across, go 36 feet into the position, and that's that. I don't have to keep telling them to keep doing the behavior. Once I cue it, you do the behavior until I've, kind of told you not to. So for my guys, the way that they are currently trained, if I give a reinforcement marker that ends behavior, they do then have permission to pop out of the weave poles. And I find this to be really helpful when I'm being lazy and want to train entries, but don't want to pull out 2x2s or pull out my channels. So I go to class, I have 10 minutes before class starts and the 12 weave poles are there, but I really only want to do entries. So I send to a really hard entry. By pole 4, I say, get it. Swift will pop out and run for the toy. All right. Or he nails that entry and I say, take, he will pop out and run in for the reinforcement to my hand. So those markers mark that behavior, but they also do, in those two examples, end the behavior as well. So if I would want him to continue the weave pulls all the way through, I simply wouldn't give a reinforcement marker, right? I would just say weave, and he would keep weaving until he's done. So I think kind of the idea of, do I need to give a verbal for the continuation of the behavior, almost doesn't really apply to the markers as much as how the dog was initially trained to the weave pulls, right? If I say tunnel, it means go in the entry, come out of the exit. Do not go in and turn around and pop back out if I'm not continuing to say tunnel, tunnel, tunnel. But yeah, so for my guys, their current situation is, if I give that marker, they can pull out. I would have to make sure to withhold that reinforcement marker until they finished for them to stay all the way through.
Wow, that is so interesting. You're the first person, maybe lots of people do it the way you're doing it, but you're the first person that I know of who has told me that, because I mean, that's exactly why I don't do that. And when I think about all the times where I've said yes inadvertently and then been forced to reward the dog, or I was just, a jerk about it and was like, I know I said yes, or I know I clicked, but I'm not going to give you a treat anyway. A lot of it happens at these weave pull entries. They get the weave pull entry and then suddenly they're popping somewhere in there and you don't even notice, or you look back on the video, maybe you rewarded quote unquote incorrectly because they're messing up the weaves later. So very interesting. And I think for people out there who would think about it, it's reassuring to hear you say that, the dogs aren't having problems with that there's a lot of understanding there. Obviously, your dogs have accomplished a lot at the very highest levels, at the absolute top of the sport right now. So very interesting. I don't know if I'm brave enough though to run out there and do that. Right? I gotta think about it.
It's taken me a while. It's taken me a while, to get adjusted and to kind of get used to this. Like I said, it's not even really been a year. So last February, I had Sarah Stremming come to my facility for 4 days of teaching, and she taught some great seminars. I took one of her online classes, and she was really the one who kind of opened up the idea to me of the value of the markers. And I think really the kind of the big takeaway I want people to have, and this podcast was kind of something that I recommended, actually goes to exactly what you just mentioned, which was the mistakes we make with markers. So yes, I talked about having 5 different markers and the convenience and the ease of it, but it's I don't even think for people it's necessarily that. I'm not advising, okay, everybody drop what they're doing and go out and teach 5 markers. But I kind of want to touch on this idea of these kind of inadvertent markers, or the accidents we make with our markers, and what I'm seeing it lead to in terms of the frustration on the dog's part. So you mentioned that you caught yourself saying yes, you didn't really mean to, but you knew you had to pay the dog. And good for you, because you are keeping the consistency and the predictability and the clarity for the dog. Where I think people run into trouble is they give these markers and don't follow through with the reinforcement, which creates a lot of frustration. And a lot of times I don't even know that they're knowing it. They say yes without even knowing that they said it, right? They're in the heat of the moment. The dog nailed that entry. So they were really excited, didn't even know they did it. Or kind of what I'm seeing a lot right now as a trend is people having these kind of subconscious markers. So they're creating a reinforcement history for the dog that they don't even know they're doing. So the example that I used actually just today in class is somebody was kind of, every time their dog finished a sequence or did something good, they went, good girl, gave a cookie. I watched them for 40 minutes do this. And I kind of took note that it was happening. Good girl, cookie, good girl, that's it, cookie, right? One time they're doing a sequence. This was about 45 minutes into class. Dog nailed the entry and they went, good girl, never delivered a cookie. Dog popped out of the weave poles, looked at them and kind of went, well, where's my cookie? And all of a sudden the handler got upset. Hey, why'd you pop those weave poles? Get back here. Come on, do these weave poles. And I immediately had to stop right then and there and say, this is not the dog's fault. Do not get angry at your dog for popping the weave poles. The problem was because she had inadvertently, without ever knowing that it would happen, or without ever knowing that it had happened, trained the dog that good girl was a marker. She didn't intend for it to be a marker. She didn't come in saying, oh, I'm going to train good girl to be a marker. But because she was consistently establishing this pattern of good girl, cookie from her hand, good girl, cookie from her hand, when all of a sudden she said good girl and the cookie didn't come from her hand, this dog got very confused. Now, in this case, the dog was confused, but in a lot of cases, we then exhibit frustration. And the example that Sarah gives in her online class makes so much sense for me, which is automated sinks, right? Automated faucets, right? You go to the restroom, you go into the airport, there are these automated ones. So, your cue is you wave your hand under the faucet, and the reinforcement is that the water will come out. Now, we've all hit that really bad bathroom where you go and you wave your hand under the faucet and no reinforcement. Water doesn't come out, right? So that predicted reinforcer no longer occurs after several reps and a history of that reinforcement. And what do? We get pissed off. We get frustrated. We wave our hands faster. We hit the faucet or we cuss. We get very frustrated. And then all of a sudden, what do? We seek reinforcement elsewhere. We go to the next faucet, right? Well, in the dog's case, that frustration is demonstrated not by cussing and waving their hands faster, but is demonstrated by barking, jumping up and down, biting at us. And when they don't get that reinforcement and they give up, they seek reinforcement elsewhere. But that often then means they turn and go sniff. They go and visit the ring crew. They wander off and look at that fuzz on the ground because they're trying to find that reinforcement from something other than the predicted deliverer, which is us. So I think for a lot of people, what I really want handlers to start thinking about, because, there's a lot to markers, is how they're possibly kind of subconsciously training these markers to the dogs without even knowing it, and the consequences that it's then causing or the confusion that it's causing and building into our agility. That frustration, that barking, that spinning, that jumping up and down, and that lack of clarity it's giving the dog.
This is amazing. This is really huge because it's not just that the dog's not getting the reward and they're mad they're not getting the reward. The thing that's making the dog so angry is that you said they were getting the reward and now you're not giving them the reward. Okay?
Exactly.
By your actions.
By your actions. You don't
actions.
even realize
yes.
it. Now, I think in agility, the first mind-blowing thing, so if you're a beginner handler, you may not even be aware of this yet. You may not have encountered this yet. But in agility, when we think of a cue, when I first started, let me just start with me as a beginner, as a novice. I thought a cue was basically a command. We didn't even call them cues then. We called them commands. And I would say something and the dog would do it. But after I'd been in agility for a little while, we learned that the dogs aren't just listening for that cue, for the command. They're also watching your body. Right? So that when you said certain words, they notice, his body always seems to do the same thing when he says that word. Therefore, we're going to turn to the right. And so our dogs would cue off of other things besides the verbal, right? They would they would see your hand drop, and that might mean take the tunnel instead of the A-frame or whatever inadvertent thing that you had shown the dog by doing it on a consistent basis. Right. And that's what Jennifer is talking about here. Like you're not even aware that you're doing this, but to the dog, it's as good as a promise. And it's one that you're breaking. And that's why the dog is so upset, so frustrated, and basically leaving the training process. Wow. That is really fascinating. The other thing that I'm going to do for you guys is Jennifer and Sarah here have been talking about Sarah Stremming. So what we'll do is we're going to find a link to her course. I think she has a course specifically about markers, right? When she came to your facility, she did a whole day, a workshop.
So when she came last February, she did her Worked Up seminar, which her Worked Up online class does start talking about markers. But in just 3 weeks, she's coming back. And I'm so excited because that's where she's going to present her Clarity Rules seminar. And this is really kind of talking a lot about, exactly. So we're coming up on 3 weeks away. And I'm super excited because it's going to be kind of taking all of the stuff that we're talking about, but going to the expert, right? I'm new to this. I'm certainly not claiming to be a perfectionist on this, but yes, her Clarity Rules class, that's kind of, I think where there's a little bit more work on the markers.
Yeah. And I know she's coming to Texas actually, either the week before or the week after. It's the week you guys are at Westminster. So this year, I will not be at Westminster. Sarah and Jennifer will be at Westminster. And, I'll have to take care of the dogs and the kids back here in Texas. But it's that weekend, so I don't think I can go either, even though she's here in Texas. So she's pretty close. She's 200 miles away. So I could get there in maybe 3.5, 4 hours. But I don't think I'll be able to go to that either. But what we'll do is we'll link to her so that you can go and find it. But I like that we're having this discussion because in my mind, I thought, I've got the clicker. I've got yes, which functions as the clicker. But now that I think about it, there are times when I release the dog and say, okay. In fact, I had a clicker session today working with the golden retriever puppy who's now 11 months old. She's doing great. And if I've got her, say, on the bed, and then I work a little duration on the bed, it's click, treat, click, treat, click, treat 3 or 4 times. And the whole time she's holding position in the bed. And then I say, okay. And I throw the treat. Yes, okay is a cue, but it's also a marker. And so I think that's something interesting to say, where the marker also functions as a cue. So you have several, right.
For the toy, yeah.
It's like, yeah, there's a reward coming. And oh, by the way, here's a little extra information. And it's mostly related to what type of reward you're getting or where you're getting the reward. So I think that's an interesting added element that you don't always get with the clicker unless you inadvertently are always doing it the same way with the clicker, right? When I click, if I always bring food, number one, it's food and never a toy. Number two, I always bring it to their mouth and put it in their mouth as opposed to having them come and do it. There may be people out there where you always give the food to them. So one day you're working on it, you click and you want them to come and get the food to you, and then they just kind of stay away from you. And you're like, whoa. And then so your trainer looks at it and says, well, your dog's a little demotivated. Your dog's a little, they don't understand. Well, no. There's confusion because of everything that you've been doing in the past, all of that history. And so when you start talking, when I start making these observations, and these are very subtle problems to see in training, right? In fact, I just gave an example where an instructor sees it and completely misinterprets what's going on, right? She's like, oh, your dog's low drive. They're checked out. They're not paying attention. They don't want to take the food. They're too stressed. Maybe they're stressed. There's something stressful in the environment. Let's go down that road. And it has nothing to do with that. The dog is just expecting you to bring the food to them. And they kind of get up halfway and they're like, hey, are you bringing it to me? Should I go over there? And I see how this could be really powerful for doing that. And watching that video you sent was very, very cool. Of course, now that I've said that, everyone is going to want to see that video.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, right? for the VIPers, if you guys go watch those teeter and those table videos, you are going to go, oh, okay, now it's all come together. It makes sense, because when she's on the end of the teeter and I click, she is frozen little statue because she knows I'm coming back to her. But when she's on the end of the teeter and I say take, boom, she powers off and she's running to me, because that's where the reinforcement is going to be given. So, again, I'm seeing the benefits of these markers. It's reinforcing for me. I'm seeing so much more clarity in her understanding and behavior, which is then kind of making me want to be more consistent and adapt it to the older dogs as well. And I'll insert real quickly here the lack of markers and the problem that can have. Real quick, one example on this: if you have a dog who tends to be one who will kind of like sniff for fuzz on the ground or sniff a little fuzzy, or they see a piece of tape, that is another really, really good candidate for a dog who always needs to be given a marker when food is delivered on the ground. Just last week in class, we were doing weave pole drills. And so we were weaving towards the wall. So I told him I wanted to do 3 reps where the handler was hanging back, and to, toss the cookie out at the end of the weave poles as the handler hung back. But then the 4th one, the dog was going to weave to the end of the poles, and then they were going to turn and run to the tunnel. So I had a student did the weaves, threw the cookie, no markers, said nothing, just literally threw the cookie, or some generic good dog, or, we did the 2nd one, threw the cookie, 3rd one, threw the cookie. Now it's time to run the sequence. She does the weaves. She took off running towards the tunnel. Dog kept tracking forward and started sniffing around and looking at the end of the weave poles for the cookie, because she was never telling the dog when it should be on the ground sniffing and looking for the cookie versus when it shouldn't. So now the dog goes, oh, there might be a cookie on the ground. I don't know if there will or won't be. So maybe this fuzz is a cookie. Or you go to extend your hand in like a forward send, and the dog goes flying out because they think that hand action of raising was you rolling or tossing a cookie.
Oh, yes.
So if my dog should never be looking for food on the ground unless I have said fine, period, end of discussion. So if I say fine, you can put your head down and look for food. Otherwise, that piece of fuzz is not a cookie. That piece of tape is not a cookie. That line on the ground at the soccer arena, not a cookie, not a toy. So I think the absence of them can cause a dog just to start to guess like, well, she often will throw food and never tells me when it is or isn't coming. So maybe that's what this fuzz is. And so I think, or you'll hear people say that. You'll say, oh, I don't want to throw cookies on the ground. My dog will start sniffing a bunch if I do that. Well, not if you're consistent about giving them permission to access that food on the ground, or kind of telling them rather that food is going to be on the ground.
Yeah,
Wow.
and we already see that now with the tug toy, at least the way we do it.
I was just going to say that with toys, because they anticipate you reaching in to a pocket maybe.
What were you going to say? What I was going to say is, like, our dogs, when we do throw our toy, but we always say, get it, right? And so I run around with a toy in my hand, and my dog's not snapping at my hand because he doesn't go for the toy unless I say, get it. And so I can run around with a toy and it doesn't affect his performance. And in fact, he's completely oblivious to it until it appears in front of him. And so it's a very similar thing. I just haven't done that same thing with food. Or rather, actually, I guess we kind of have, but right now we have this, it's basically the same. If I toss a treat, I'm going to say, get it. If I toss a toy, I'm going to say, get it. And, the dog figures out.
Well, so it's interesting, right? Are you doing it 100% of the time? Were you aware? And for me, because I use a clicker a lot on course, right? So I would click and then say, get it. So then get it there is not a marker.
No, it is the cue, because when we say get it, we mean you should go get that. They should not go get it, right? They shouldn't just leave it on the ground. So and all cues are kind of like that, right? The more the dog likes to do the behavior that they're cueing, the more the cue can function as a marker.
Certainly. And so get it. What you get in these behavior changes.
Right. So get it for a dog that loves to tug is, it's a cue, but really it's a marker, because they're going to want to get it every single time. A dog that doesn't really like to tug, that is less of a marker and more of a, hey, I'm throwing a toy and you're supposed to go and get it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where there's value in having a different marker for food and toys if you have a dog who really values them differently. I have a student who's using the same marker for food and toys, but it's a dog who really prefers the toy. It's a border collie. And she'll say, get it, and toss food. And the look of disappointment on this dog is heartbreaking. And I'm really trying to push her. I'm really trying to push her to separate them, because the dog is genuinely disappointed that it's getting food. So if she had just said, fine, the dog knew going into it, your reinforcement is food. You didn't have a moment to think that you were going to get something better. But if she says, get it, then it's the toy and the dog can be excited. So it's kind of like, being asked to do a job and thinking that you're going to get one thing. Hey, will you do this? I'm going to pay you X amount. And then at the end you find out, oh, no, it was half that. Right? Versus going into it saying, oh no, you're only making this price. So, for dogs that value food and toys equally, saying get it for a thrown reinforcement might work. But I do think for some of the dogs who truly do value them differently, you can have that kind of disappointment when you have cued what they think to be one thing and then they get something else.
Wow,
so that's where right now my thrown food is fined. And my thrown toy or toy to a dead toy or toy from hand is get it. So that when I have my border collie who much prefers toy, she's not going, oh man, I really wanted that, or I really wanted this. Same thing with the Sheltie as well. But the opposite, he prefers food.
Yeah. So I'll say one last thing. We had a really great talk here. One of the problems with running contacts is that we have this idea in running contacts of JR and NR. So for those of you who don't know, it's the idea that when they get a perfect great hit, it's a jackpot. You want the dog to understand that it's a jackpot, a very special reward, winning a jackpot. There's the R, which is reward. So that's just, a kind of, I guess, a regular, typical reward. And your NR, which is no reward, no reinforcement. But the problem here is, as a marker, we're using the clicker, or if you're using a mat that chimes, right? It's going to give the same tone whether the hit is an R or a really good hit where you want a jackpot, right? So you're using the same reinforcement, and then at least for myself, I've been in a situation where, okay, now I need some way to differentiate the two rewards, but to the dog, it's like somewhat dishonest, and I could feel it bleeding off some of the speed and drive if there was a series of R's without jackpots, because each time they're getting the click, and then now that we're talking about this, I'm thinking the dog must be thinking, hey, well, I don't understand. I'm getting clicked every time, right? I've had,
or is it great?
Yeah, like what's the deal? Like in every other aspect of our relationship, sir, Mr. Trainer, I'm always on the right track when I get the click. But now, you're just like petting me and you're not like tugging and screaming and hollering happily. What's the deal here? So I think in an ideal world, we would have two different markers, right? You would have a click and a bell, or you would have a buzz and a horn, or I don't know, something along those lines, right?
That one's super easy. You put a manners minder out there, you're treat and train, you put a dead toy. And when you get the behavior you want, and if it's a jackpot and your dog prefers the toy, then you train him that the click is the toy. And if it's a just regular reinforcement, then you hit the beep on the treat and train and they get the treat. You just have two out there, two different markers. That one's easy peasy.
Nice. Well, I'm so glad that we did this podcast because it really, I think, tackles some of the very difficult issues that people have in training, and a lot of times don't even realize it. So I'm telling you that I am now getting this information from Jennifer. I'm going to go back and I'm going to try and get with Sarah Stremming, certainly, but also reevaluate the markers that I'm using, what they mean, what I think they mean to the dog, and then what I want them to mean. So I'm going to really clean up. I'm all about cleaning up my cues, because that's how we communicate with our dogs. What we're really talking about with cues and markers and so on and so forth is how we talk to our dogs, literally how the two species communicate, right? How we understand each other. So it's very important to always work on that clarity.
And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, 1TDC.com, hititboard.com, and Westminster Kennel Club. The Masters Agility Championship at Westminster is in just a few days on Saturday, February 8th. Follow the preliminary rounds live on the Westminster Kennel Club app and tune in to Fox Sports 1 on February 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern to watch the televised finals. Happy training!